continue.
We are Econet, and we have a lot to share with you today, starting with Montijn, who will talk about his understanding of the three minds. And then Andrej will continue with his architectural framework. And then Steph will introduce us to the world of cryptocurrency thinking and in terms of structure and randomness. And then Jere will conclude with his investigation. And so I am Andrius from Math for Wisdom. Montijn, please start us off.
Yes, thank you. I will also try to draw while I'm trying to give my understanding of the three minds, and also just a bit more broader context, but it won't take too much time. No, it's not this, it's something else. So generally, just before I go into this, the goal is right now, I will try to take 10 minutes for this. Understand what do the three minds refer to. And this goes from a more general concern. We talk a lot about concepts, but three minds, be it morality, be it consciousness, be it free will, be it God. But this is concern, what are we talking about? What it is that we're talking about? What does it refer to when we use these terms? And I think we all understand that there's necessity to understand what it is that we refer to. So that's also more general my project, and I would like to give my proposal for the three minds and to see if to what extent you guys agree and follow. So the three minds, what do they refer to? Right? Generally, and this goes more about also my general approach. When we talk about what are we talking about, I think there are two ways. For me, the most technical layer is we talk about certain states of a system. And that is more specifically, we can talk about the three minds as is, what do we talk about when we point to the real world, to the physical world? So what do we refer to, like physicians do? Or we can talk about what does it mean for the experience? But those two are accounted for when we stick to the mathematics for active inference. So I will give my account of the three minds of active inference. So I will talk about belief distributions and how I understand the three minds in terms of the generative model. And then now for each of these mathematical constructs, we can say, well, what are we talking about? We can talk about how these beliefs are represented by neuronal processes. So we talk about the brain, or we can talk about what those beliefs refer to for the experience. And for that, we have formology. So those like persistencies. Let's just first go over the maths, because that's actually quite simple. I think the three minds are quite... and let's see then what the intuition is, and perhaps shortly what it means for the experience. So the first mind, with that in mind. So given that we use this active inferential approach, I think the first mind is the one that drives hypotheses. So it is the reason why a certain hypothesis is felt as true. So when we have a certain belief, a certain belief in a generative model, from state space to to some number 1 or 0, so it's like a belief. The first mind is really the answering mind, like Andrius says. It is the one that gives an hypothesis as in the state, and that is felt, as a certain persistence, like an answer the mind gives to the conscious experience. So it's really this state. But the second mind is the one that is saying, well, this is just one state to the many different possible states that could have been there, right? Because when we talk about a distribution, it's always it's just one state out of many, which it could have been. This is the hypothesis space. So the second mind is the awareness that these things can vary. That's once we had an answer, when we question it, we see counterfactuals. We see that it could have been different. So that's just what the second mind does. It's really saying, okay, you give me this answer, but you ask a question saying, well, it could have been different. And the third mind is, well, let's just first also take the active inference terms. The first and the second mind are the generative model. I hope everyone who is a bit familiar with active inference sees that. And the third mind is changing the questions you ask yourself, which we will see as really as a different kind of power between how the answers relate to questions. Because whereas the second mind says, well, you talk about this hypothesis, it's in a state, and it could have been, a different kind of question you could have asked. Different kind of states could have filled that question. You could also say, no, we should have asked a whole different questions to begin with. So that's really, it's just like all the different kind of beliefs that are in your body, in your brain, different hypothesis spaces. The third mind says, well, we should be asking radical different questions. So the second mind is the questioning mind, and the third mind is really the meta questioning kind. What are the questions we should be asking ourselves? And we see, I think, from this, so in active inference, this is called structural learning. So it's really about how the dynamics of the generative model itself, so not like how the hypotheses come into play. And I do think that this captures Andrius' signature dynamic between the first and second mind and how the third mind mediates between it. Because if we have here the question and the answering, now we get these answers, and every time the questioning mind can say, well, it could have been different, etc., etc. He's understanding that it's one hypothesis of many. But the third mind, by changing these questions, it also, if you go from here, this kind of question to this kind of question, so this kind of space, it changes the dynamics between the question and answering mind. It changes what kind of answers we are even looking for, because we have a different kind of representation, different kind of hypothesis space over, for example, in our brain, sensorium. So in short, in just active inferential terms, I think the first and second mind just really capture that question answering, so which is like the generative model. And the third mind is structural learning. It's really about changing the kind of questions we should be asking ourselves. And then for each of these things, we can ask ourselves, what does it mean for the physical world? Well, we know active inference has implemented in the brain, so we can point at the brain things. So we've solved the physical reference problem in this way of the three minds. But also when we go to the experience, and when we go to the experience, it's a very short, I won't go too much detail into it, but it's a certain state belief form correspondence, in which you can say, well, these hypotheses, how do we feel these hypotheses? How do we feel the experiential mind? These hypotheses, I believe, we feel as persistences. So it's like if this is a conscious space, a space of all conscious experience, and the persistence nothing more. So what does it refer to? Also a certain subset, so we know what it refers to, we know what the experience is, and then we can, the questioning mind is nothing more than saying, well, this form could have been also different other forms. While the third mind is saying, well, we should have perhaps used a whole different class of forms to begin with to even populate our field. There's an experiential side to this as well, but again, I won't go too much into it. This is just like a brief overview of how I solve the reference problems of the three minds. Okay, 10 minutes, good. That was it.
I'm happy, Montijn. Maybe quick comments. Anyone would want to comment on this?
Yeah, well, since you have started from understanding these minds in correct way, in less interpretable, yes, let's say, let's some consensus that everybody agrees or something like that. Maybe some comparison, especially for someone who will try to watch our YouTube video. So usually people refer to minds as the two minds, consciousness and non-consciousness. Right? So where do they fit here, and how it is different from typical understanding of this duality of minds from general people perspective, which is common among the people?
Very shortly, this definition is more about that we understand for this case what it refers to, but I'm not saying that mind should always, the word, because the word mind is a very messy word. For a lot of people, it can mean different things. The problem is not that it refers to different things. The problem is that we at least understand what it refers to. So it could be that with the two minds, people refer to very different kind of things. That is fine. But here, it's Andrius three minds. That is the question here.
Yes, so it's like orthogonal classification to the typical consciousness, non-consciousness classification.
So, for example, for you, I would be asking what is referred to when you say the conscious mind and the non-conscious mind. So now it would be for you the job, for I do not understand it fully. But that's like a perhaps for a different talk, but you understand like the concern here, right? Because I've solved the reference problems for these three concepts, and when you say your own two words, you have to solve the reference problem for that as well, and then we can compare.
Yes. But this problem was solved by many. Yes, and a lot of us have that intuitive understanding, and we can formulate it quite clear, which will be a little different. But we discussed it with Andrius as well. So perhaps we should look for examples when this standard classification is not sufficient. Yes, when we see there is something different, which some middle mind connecting other two minds. Yes, then it.
I would jump in. First of all, I'm just very happy with what Montaigne's done, because I'm very happy for his attention, that he thought it was worthwhile, like he saw it was important to me, and he said at some point, like he'd figure it out. And so the idea being that what Montaigne has done, like if we, in our shared reality, imagine if each of us had our personal way of explaining the three minds, right? And so then we could take those five, let's say, descriptions, and then we could say, okay, what do they all have in common, let's say, that we kind of like really want to emphasize? But the point being that what Montaigne does was he chose a language that he was comfortable in, like he chose, active inference, and he looked at it in terms of formology. He did everything in the way he felt that, okay, he's using the language he likes to speak. But the crucial thing being that he's giving a hypothesis of what this could mean. He's not saying this is absolutely true. He's just saying, look, I'm trying to understand what Andrius is talking about. This is my hypothesis of like what would be the most generous, liberal interpretation that Andrius is talking sense, right? So that's just a hypothesis. Then the idea is, okay, you've given it the status of a hypothesis, of an answer. Now maybe it could become a question, like, well, what is this really all about formally? Like, because Montaigne is using his favorite formalism, but maybe there's actually not, there's other formalisms, and then you can choose among the forms. And then finally to say, okay, if this is real, if you can talk about it on the hypothesis level and you can talk about it on the formal level, what does it want to be expressed as itself? Like what is it itself, and what is the natural language for this thing? You see, where we let go of all our personal languages and says, okay, it wants to be spoken of in this way. Then wow, this is really real, fundamental, metaphysical. So we have to get there. But we first start by our hypothetical speakings. Does that make sense?
Yes. It makes sense a lot, because in this form, we actually, each of us, while making this form of presentation, we actually represent not more, not less, but what we feel. Yes, what we feel inside.
Feeling.
So we disconnect from some standards and try to scratch it just from the surface of our feeling. Because again, when we talk about three, it means that we select this number as sufficient to be full in some sense.
Yes.
That's something to investigate, right? That's something to, but
Yes.
so like just to speak in terms of what you're saying, like about the mind, like, we could talk about levels of awareness. We could talk a lot about some things. When talking about the unconscious or conscious, you see, it's important, like you say, to what are we talking about? Because this is saying as if we had access to our own unconscious. To say when we come up with this hypothesis based on our feeling, like that's our unconscious saying, look, this is how I would talk about it, right? See, so it's not unconscious in the sense that we're not aware. It's saying that there's a processing in our mind, like the gut feeling and the intuition, whatever. Like, it's opaque to us, but we recognize it in ourselves that we're doing these things, that are opaque, let's say. Whereas the formal logic is not opaque, it's transparent, and you can, work in a transparent way, in a conscious way. See, so that's subjective distinction between unconscious and conscious. It's not the third person distinction to say, oh, that person's not aware, or they're aware. So maybe Steph, Jere, anything else, and then I'll hand it over to Andrej. So then Andrej, why don't you then more time?
Just a small step, because indeed there's this exhaustiveness concern of Andrej, because we have the first, the second mind, and there's the third mind, but whether it be the fourth mind, fifth mind. But this active inference formalism does account for that, because the whole theory works with people have a generative model in their brain. That is the first and second mind. And there's a structural learning, which is the third mind, and there's no fourth mind because that's already the whole picture. So just to alleviate that concern, with the active inference, account for that. But
that's one piece of evidence. And so, the point of the theory translators, I've got almost 400 examples of pieces of evidence. So, anyway, so the different languages. Okay, Andrej, why don't please continue with your exposition?
Okay. I will try to share, but again, sharing is not turned. I have requested for.
Let's see. I have to change that generally.
Oh, okay. Montain's got you.
Yeah. So it is. Actually, as I said previously, I have scratched all these topics, and I am right now in that brewing state when I am trying to connect things between, to understand what are the points of connections between different topics of ours, of different members of our group. So first of all, I found a lot of common, but again, it's now I'm not talking about the three minds. Yes, I'm talking more or less about this focus, maybe on approaching rules in society when we try to define what is right and what is wrong. In some sense, this triad which I had presented was a little different. It was referented to the identity, meaning, and the right way to live. Yes, and I find, it is not about how we are functioning as humans, yes, but it is about what are some specific anchors we should focus on to understand ourselves better, yes. So a little different perspective. Nevertheless, this was the topic which we omitted previously, and I wanted to talk quite a bit, because we were talking about that some freedom to redefine the rules according to the moral, yes? So the morality as a central feature, let's say, around which we can build policy in the society and so on. And in some sense, when we talked about explicit and implicit morals, actually, I ended up with conclusion that in some sense it was done already. So if we will check the history of how rules or laws appeared in society, first we had some morals.
Can I just wanted to jump in, and so you'll be talking about morality, and this is a very important distinction, implicit versus explicit. And so the third mind is all about those types of distinctions. So I want to go back to the existential triad that you had and just say, when you have a triad like that, and then the question will be, why isn't it four? Or, how do you know it's a structure? So can you bring that up, the existential triad? you see, I look at that and I compare it with my catalog, right? So I say, oh, there's 3 here, but really I think there's 4 because I see this as what, how, why. Like, so for example, the right way to live, that's how to live, right? And then why to live would be the meaning of life, let's say, what you say, the theological pursuit of what you value. Like, why are you, living this way? That's the meaning. And then what you're living, that's your identity. That's who you are.
So
So I
here
don't know if
inside,
that's that's my hypothesis, let's say for you. Is that
and we can see that, these 3 minds form the identity in some sense, or actually they form us.
to slow down, but this idea of these 4 levels there's 4 levels of knowledge, I claim, whether, what, how, why. So whether is the base level of knowledge. So whether you are, it's not really a moral issue. It's just a fact, maybe. But what, how, why, like would that be appropriate to say like identity is like what you are living, what you are, and the right way is how you should be living, and the meaning is why you're living. Is that a proper?
Yes, but leveling approach probably is bad here because there is nothing. Yes, maybe I used this Anchor, Compass, and Vehicle, but here,
no, I'm not talking about the Anchor, and I wouldn't use those. Those are just AI generated. That's a bad mirror, right? Like it's not really what you're. But I'm just telling. So like the mirror, like
which one is AI generated?
You said the anchor, the compass, the vehicle, right?
Yes, it generated these labels.
Pardon?
These labels, but
yeah. So I just want to erase that. But what you really were saying was the right way, meaning, and identity. That's what you're saying. That's in all your.
But these labels are exactly what I wanted to say, just a shortened version. Yes. So this is one of the views how we can approach it.
Well, so I'm giving a different. So I just want to check my hypothesis first of all, just for clarity. So I'm saying, because I guess the point being that like for this language of wisdom, or if it's wondrous wisdom, any other language wisdom, you really want to understand like what is the structure you're talking about, right? Like it can't just be whatever, right? Like it can't be whatever AI comes up with, right? No, it's got to be much more real than that. So I'm saying like something I think, last 40 years is very real are these 4 levels of knowledge, whether, what, how, why. And all I'm asking is to say, does that seem to be a proper analysis to say, or a proper hypothesis to say, look, these are all about ways of living and like how to live, that's the right way. That's what the right way is saying. Why to live, that's what you mean by the meaning of life. And what is living, that's what you mean by identity.
I wouldn't simplify. It is a strong simplification because how, what, and why is in the right way inside of each of these, there are 4 of them. You can find them and you can feel them actually.
Yeah,
you can have what here, yes. You can have what here.
You can always do that with anything. You can always approach it from any of those ones. But the question is, which one are they asking? So if someone's saying like the right way, if someone's talking about the right way to live, I'd say, well, they're talking about how to live.
Yeah. But the thing is, if you will think only about this, you will be in the middle of nowhere.
Let's take it a step at a time. Montijn wants to speak.
Yeah, because I think this is also a very good case where we are having a semantic discussion about what does it refer to and what does most justice to it. And I would like to also see, do we see the value of solving the reference problem for these 3 concepts? So when I ask Andrej, what is it that you're talking about? That you have a satisfying answer. And how do we answer the question? How do you even answer what it is you're talking about? Can we point at it? Can we point at something, a physical event or an experiential event? How would you go about answering that?
Yeah. So what I wanted to say, and it is presented at the bottom, but in a shorter way, I would say all these 3 is the same, just a projection. Yes, a projection of yourself. So identity.
They're different projections, right?
Yeah, different
And
projections.
so the question is like, what makes them different? Why talk about all
Yeah.
three if instead of just talking about one? What makes
The
them different?
angle of projection,
Right.
or the angle at which you attack the same problem.
But even here, you talk about different angles of yourself. What does yourself refer to? Does yourself refer to a biological event, like you as a bear?
Yeah. Well, it is more not about yourself, but understanding yourself. Yes. So the process, not process, but the understanding, the best keyword probably.
So what and I appreciate trying to untangle this because it kind of gives the structure, like for the reference problem, whatever. But you have a topic which would be, let's say, the self, and not just the self, but the self that is living a life, right? There's a self that's living a life. And then you have a collection of angles that are giving you different projections of that, right?
Yeah.
And so then what I'm saying is that, oh, is that set of angles? See, it's the set of angles that is very great content. If you can discover a set of angles that really is a framework, that's a huge discovery.
Yes, yes. Actually, I can tell that like a year ago, I was closer to identity and meaning. Yes, but then I came that you need to add something else, a new angle and the right way to live. It was started by the discussion in that emails that I saw, and I got some new perspective from this, and I think that this third one would enrich and will give it more complete view. So that again, it is a question of completeness. Yes, three, is it enough to cover everything and to not make it too complex? But again, if we want to make it complex, we can make it more of perspectives.
Well, it's not, it's more than that. See, it's about, we're trying to discuss a shared reality. What is real? You see, so you can have whatever opinions you want, but if you have a framework saying these angles come together in some kind of logical, metaphysical, way, like that's reality. We've achieved reality. So that's what I'm trying to say. Montaigne.
I think that before we even go to the angles, we must know what the angles are of. And we are talking about the angles of the self. So first, let us really try to break our heads. What does the self refer to? So that we can understand what it means to have different angles to it. And just to show you the variety of interpretations, I've said it in chat. The self can refer to the current state of conscious experience, or the physical body, or the bearer of the conscious experience that persists over time. What do you mean?
I understand, but you see, that's exactly what we have in mathematics, the recursive definition. So probably this is the biggest challenge, since the definition is recursive. You need to use the definition or the object itself in definition of that object.
So you mean it's circular? You mean the reference problems cannot be solved?
Recursive. So it is the most exact and precise tool.
Well, it can go back and forth. It can go back and forth, but we'll be. I want to conclude this. I want to have you have a brief say about the thing you wanted to talk about, but we won't. We're going to switch over to Steph soon. But I want to say, like when I was teaching an ethics class, I told myself I'm going to teach them how to create their own ethical system. And so there were three questions. The first is like, what to do? And then the second one was, why do you do it? Why should you do it? What should you do? Number one. Number two, why should you do it? And number three, how do you get yourself to do it? See, so these levels like what, how, what, why, how, they were all very relevant. And see, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you take those questions like I did and you apply them here, you get what Montaigne wanted. Like you get to say, oh, what's meant by the self here is self as this life that you're living as a whole. Okay, so I'm living a life as a whole, and I have and then I have these different angles on like what's my identity as I live my life as a whole. So the sensory experience, the phenomenological experience, that's my identity. How do I live my life as a whole? I follow some kind of algorithm or procedure, you see. And then why do I, well, what's the bigger picture on all that, right? That the teleology or whatever. I'm just saying, so then that gives you, that becomes a set of angles. And then you can say, well, why don't we have weather? And well, because you don't have a choice whether, so it just falls out. You see, but it says there's exactly four. You and I can discuss that separately. Montijn.
Yeah, shortly, a short note, because I do think that for me to follow you at least, Andrej, I need to understand what you mean with self. And so you said that the self has a recursive definition. I would like to understand why and what that is. I'm not really sure if you already have an answer for that.
Good. So maybe I will try to use some, I don't know, functional programming terminology to show it more formally. Yes.
Because you're trying to solve the reference problems, and once we have done that and we find agreement, we can talk about angles.
Yeah.
So let's go.
I think what I was trying to say was that the angles are maybe the way that the reference problem is solved. If you know, like I'm claiming that this set of angles that I spoke, the whether, what, how, why, that is very real. And
but what are you?
That'd be part of our shared reality. But when you have those angles, then you can look at this, say, I see these angles and I see what they're all talking about. And they solve the reference problem.
But each question needs what it's a question about. So to even ask a question we all understand, we need to know what a question is about, and that necessitates a solution to the reference problem. So we need to. That's it.
So this has been very fruitful. So we're gonna return to this and just give a couple minutes, Andrej. What you wanted to talk about? Explicit morality, implicit morality. Just introduce it for next time. But what is it that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So well, actually, what I wanted, previously I connected all these topics. We don't have time for that as now, but in fact, when people try to develop laws, in fact, they base them on ethics. Ethics were born from morality or consensus on morality. Yes, that's the primitive, too primitive, but still can be seen as definition of ethics. So ethics is like explicit consensus-based morality. And when laws are developed, why? Why do we need such law? Do not hurt children, yes? Why? Because we have ethics, we have some common understanding of what is right or what is wrong based on ethics, yes? And only because of that, laws appear. So maybe something was broken in this sequence, but referring to all these policy making changes that could be applied probably should attack that history or do not. Maybe when we talked previously about policy making and how it is done, we represented it as some primitive thing, but actually it was very complex. Yes, the laws, the ethics, everything was born through centuries in very, very complex way. And probably we should start from digging how it worked and how it works and how it was built before we improve it.
So and maybe I'll close and then I'll be handing it over to Steph. But I just want to point out like what a language of wisdom gives here. Like what does wondrous wisdom give here? So like you have a deep thinking, you end up with a distinction that pulls in different ways. Like you say, morality is some kind of internal intuition. Ethics is some kind of social obligations or social laws, etc., right? External.
Consensus.
And so you get this distinction. And then the question is, okay, what are the sets of angles, so to speak, that talk about the reality of that distinction? So I'll give you two versions, okay? And then they link them together. But one is that in talking about existence, you want to have two perspectives, like free will and fate. Like opposites coexist, all is the same. Okay, so the mind goes from free will to fate very easily. Well, another way to think about it is like if you have a cup, okay, outside versus inside. It's a very curious thing. When you're outside something, it also has an inside, and they're opposites. But if you fall inside the cup, you're inside the cup, everything is inside. Like we fell inside the universe, everything is inside. There is no outside to think about. It just goes inside, inside, inside all the way. So that kind of shows like outside presumes opposites coexist. Inside doesn't. Okay, so then you can argue, well, like, are those the two angles I'm talking about? But that's a very pure metaphysical way to make that distinction. Now, on the other one, like I said, in terms of the whether, what, how, why, you're saying, I would say that the implicit intuition, morality, what you call, is related to identity. So that would be on the what level. And you say, like, internal intuition. What is the internal intuition giving me? Whereas, like, the explicit consensus socially, the ethics is about the right way. That would be like an algorithmic or legal or procedural way to participate, you see? So, and then there's a thing where, like, how is like the cause compared to what? So, like, it's these algorithms and laws and whatever are going to be laws, causes that give you effects. So the suggestion would be that the explicit consensus, these laws, give you effects that become implicit intuition. See, and so all that comes almost for free, basically. Once you have a language of wisdom, you start to clarify these things and say, that's what I think he's talking about, you see. And it's hypothetical, but that's the point of having a language of wisdom, is to kind of convert, to let go of the words and then start to think in terms of sets of angles, let's say. Montijn.
Yeah, just a small note, Andrej, do you see the questions I'm asking in chat?
What asking?
He's asking questions in chat.
Probably yes, but I
Oh yeah,
haven't.
just so you know, because you can either see it for yourself, but these are still questions unresolved for
Yeah.
me, so you know that that's something you can also clarify for the next time. And also, more generally, like a meta point, I'm also curious. We won't spend too much time discussing this, but we should, I think, give each other feedback to the extent we follow each other when we are talking. So do we follow each other? Do we feel like, okay, I'm understanding what you say, or do we feel still that you're speaking words, but I don't follow you at all? So that we also understand for ourselves, is this worthwhile speaking, or should I change my strategy? So I think that's interesting to think about. Maybe we can also already implement it.
Okay, and we'll keep coming back to this. So, Andrej, thank you for this. We didn't, we just scratched for a second time. We want to continue with this. Let me hand it over to Steph, and then if we may not have time for Jere today, but we'll see how it goes. Steph, please.
How much time do you want me to take?
15, or if you need to 20 minutes, 15 minutes, we'll have 5 minutes at the end.
Okay. You just tell me when to stop it. Anybody can interrupt. I put this together specifically for this, so I think it's loading. Yes. So I have an answer, but I think that's what informs my questions. So in terms of minds, I think about things sequentially. So Andrews, I'd like to know your comments on that at some point, including right now. Type up whenever you want. A question that comes up for me is, what is the logical process of change which occurs in physical systems? I say physical systems because I'm going to lead us through this little just fun exercise. I'll engage you very briefly. Just think about this question, and this is a question that comes up for me pretty often, but I don't have an answer yet. What is the same everywhere, regardless of physical systems? Is there a language that does persist regardless of us having a defined aboutness? I think Montaigne, in our previous conversation, continues to try and put our hands around what are we meaning, what are we about, so that we know the boundary of what we can actually ask. And I think Andrius is saying something about structure without boundary, potentially, which makes it a little more difficult to like get our hands on it. What language is the same everywhere? And I don't usually come to this conclusion, but we're speaking many different languages, and that is also why we keep asking, like, what do we mean? And that's, I think, what has potentially led Andrius and everybody else here to go into a more common language, common doesn't necessarily mean we all speak it well fluently, but math is a language that is potentially the same everywhere. So what does 2 plus 2 equal? We all comes to a similar answer of 4. What does 73 minus 42 equal? It took you a little longer to come to that answer than the previous one. What is 5 times 26? Maybe you're arriving at an answer in a different way. What is 101 divided by 43? I don't assume anybody here, besides potentially Andrius, is coming to a precise number. I wouldn't. You can say something out loud if you want to. This is the answer.
Andrius would know that.
Oh, yeah.
There's probably a structure that Andrius went to in his head. Andrius, I'm
I
curious.
did a fraction,
Do you have?
but that doesn't count. So,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So there's just part of what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that these are all like definable transformations of a particular language. And for me, one of the interesting aspects is that these aren't all as easy to do on board our personal physical system, that they do require alternative tools or methods of getting there, or you need a level of fluency to get there. Eventually, we can all get there potentially. And so in my world, a question, very human to me, that I think is part reference problem and just part intellectually stimulating is like economics, what causes change in physical systems, how should we think about that? And I do think money has this same kind of language everywhere, possibility to it, but maybe we're not there yet.
Just to step back with those questions. So just a couple comments, like to share my thinking, but like, what language is the same
Please.
everywhere? The type of thing that comes to mind, first of all, is like silence, right? Like, so whatever language you speak, I think that they all have a notion of silence, you see. And so that gets leveraged a lot, right? Like, silence has a lot of meaning in languages, and it's usually not recognized. And then like, what is the same everywhere, regardless of physical systems? Then like the distinction between, let's say, what's physical and what's non-physical. Like, so, like I was showing with the cup, like what's inside the cup and what's outside the cup, right? So what would be the effects and what would be the causes, right? Like, so you start to get this metaphysical thing. And then like, what does 2 plus 2 equal? Well, that's a very important thing. Like 2 plus 2 could equal 1, you see, in a base 3, right? See, so that what that means is that you don't know, like, not base 3, but it would be 1 1, but in a Z3, like in a 3-handed clock, if you had a clock with 3 hours, right, and you go around 4 hours, you end up at 1 hour, right? Like, so in a 12-hour clock, like 10 plus 4 is 2, right? So the point being that just because you write something down in the usual way doesn't mean that people are going to read it, forced to read whatever. And that kind of shows that there's always context. You can't specify the context always. So you can't run away. So that's another question, like with the language everywhere. Like every language is going to presume context, that you do something. Now, another thing that like all languages probably do is that they presume, if you want to bootstrap, you want to presume the structure of communication. So like if communication works like A engages B, right? And B may engage A, then you have like an X arrow Y type of setup. So that's going to be part of your syntax, you see, and that's going to be part of your semantics. You're going to start to have these X arrow Y structures for the simple reason is that that's all you really know about communication. So you're going to bootstrap, use that form to say, I know this and they must know this. So we both know something. So let's start with what we both know. Does that make sense? So these are all These are all like ways of kind of stepping out of the usual scholastic way and to say, look, like, we can leverage our internal thing. So, and so what does
Interesting.
something cost to make? Like you can play around, like I think when Montaigne would say that, well, what does cost refer to? You can all of a sudden have all kinds of things that cost could mean, right? Like,
Yep. Fun time.
Yeah, and also to continue from Andrius, these are interesting questions, but for me to really um, feel that the knowledge hides behind it, I have to first understand the question, feel like, okay, this is a gap in my knowledge. This is something that I can know. And right now, with these questions in and of itself, there's too little understanding. So I don't feel, okay, that you're really, I'm really understanding it, and understanding the question. So in that sense, how to understand the question is by solving the reference problems, right? So what is, and perhaps also with examples, because there are many ways to get intuition for the question. So I can go on my very shallow interpretation of the question. So what is, for example, the same everywhere regardless of physical systems? I could say, well, those are laws and laws of nature because they are time invariant and everywhere. Or what's the logic process of change which occurs in physical systems? Well, the past of the physical system. That how and with those laws combined, you get those changes, right? So, but I'm not really sure if that's like the thing. So I'm always open for you just to really drill that question into it, to really say, okay, what is it? So perhaps you have already the answer, but the answer is a slot to us an understanding of the question. So I would like to get an understanding of the question from you.
I think something to add, and I like that Montaigne has us focus on the reference problem, and I think that that's something we could, in our pursuit of shared reality, we could do that. But a key way to do the reference problem is empathetic, leap of empathy, right? So you try to empathize with Steph and say, what could he possibly mean? A, B, C, and you come up with different hypotheses, and then and so it's imperfect, it's guessing, it's a leap. But that's how to
Sure.
that's
It goes in both ways. Sure.
with hypotheses. Okay, Steph, please.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Andrews, I would have never even considered that 2 + 2 is not 4, and therefore, it does matter what context we sit within. But how many people? I care about humans, so that's part of my context partly. And so if we say how many humans on Earth would potentially come to the answer that 2 + 2 does not equal 4 or equals 1 or could equal 1, I would assume that we would get to a much smaller possible universe of communication, and therefore I wouldn't assume that as my base. And so probabilistically, I'll go into a probabilistic universe where the humans I care to, who I think I'm interacting with and can find common ground. If I say 2 + 2 = 4, that gives us a reference frame that may not be universally definable everywhere at all times, but it's generally like good enough for the things I care about.
So what this
acknowledge.
illustrates, what this illustrates is the leap of empathy, right? Like to say, like you're saying, I'm talking to normal people who are sympathetic, whatever, right? And then the ability to adjust. And then the fact that it all depends on context. Like there's no perfect way to communicate because it all hinges on context. And there's no perfect way to specify context. So, okay. And maybe just to say, like, so Shannon, I think all of us are familiar with this on some level. I may actually know the least about this, but Jere, you know about Shannon's theory quite a lot. Is that right? And Andrej, right? And Montaigne?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if Andrej, you were going to say something previously.
I just wanted to add that besides the context, there are some norms, yes? And even Andrius, if he would be at exam and it will be written 2 + 2 and you must select something and no other clues, he would assume that it is base of 10. So the answer will be correct. So if we will put into context some norms, and if some language on some usual norms works well, such as maths, then it is one of the best ways to transfer the information.
And I think Andrius operates in the space below those norms to reveal
Yeah.
more wisdom underneath of what we just
Right.
assume from the beginning.
Well, and so there's superficial consensus, and so norms are kind of like operating somewhere on the spectrum between superficial consensus and fundamental consensus, right? And so dependent, like when Andre talks about like the ethical laws, like they're somewhere on that spectrum, right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so
I'm about to talk about this, by the way.
I'm also just very curious. I'm not sure if you see the chat as well, but understanding what you mean with language, and just so you can like shortly brief it. I follow the active inference interpretation. So understanding language, so receiving language, understanding someone's message is nothing more than correctly inferring the causes behind the utterances that someone spoke. And that is always, depending on the likelihoods in our generative model, explaining this noise aspect, and that we can only hope to calibrate our generative models, understand the same kind of generative models, same kind of framework, so that we correctly infer what the actual cause is, the actual generative process, in that sense, their generative model in the world behind the letters. Yeah. Is that a familiar notion of language to you, and do you subscribe to it?
Yeah. So your previous statement and this statement are both pointing for me towards, well, one, I'll acknowledge that I haven't actually asked the question yet. So we're in uncertainty right now. Like I haven't defined the question. That's to answer your previous statement on the previous slide. And then this one is, most people here are speaking more than one human language. I only speak English. So you all might have reference to alternative logics that I don't know about in English. But when I'm saying language, I'm not necessarily talking about English or Lithuanian or another language. I'm trying to potentially talk about, like a language has its own generative model of context, and so it has its own rules. But in words, in whatever language, human language, I guess I'll try and be specific and say human language. I think there is no definable full space that you can be infinitely precise about. So on English, as we currently are communicating, I don't think we'll get to precision. And so I prefer to go to another language that has more precision baked in. But that might mean that we don't share that language that I'm going to, and therefore we lose context for what we're even talking about.
Okay. Steph, we're so excited to see the next slide. Maybe, I don't know, but you have like a couple minutes. Could you wrap up?
Yeah, sure.
Point us for the next time you talk, like what you want us to think about.
Okay, sure. Shannon did this well. He said on language, we can get precise, and he doesn't include any real subjectivity to it. And so we lose some things, but we get precision in other ways. But this is thinking about channel capacity. And so I think a lot of consensus can be found in studying Claude Shannon's mathematical theory of communication. That theory applies to this money theory and blockchains, because we can get to a place where we can define absolutely the space of rules, and we can get precise about what we're talking about. But this statement, Seignorage, is motivating the reason and the main question I'm about to get to on the next slide. But Seignorage is the difference between what the face value of money is. So if we're thinking in the language of the US dollar, because that's my native currency, and I think it proliferates the world it's the widest reference point in money terms, then $1 bill is the face value of the money, and the cost of producing it is like, what did it cost to print in the ink and paper, or to add a zero in a digital ledger? And so the difference there would be something like, this is from the Federal Reserve Bank website. $1 costs 4.1 cents per note to make in a physical world. And so we can say that Seignorage, there is generated about 96 cents of value to the creating institution. I'm moving fast here, but what I want to get to is the main question is, I think the concept of seigniorage should directionally move towards zero, that the face value of money should equal about the cost it is to produce, that it should afford no additional power to the production, to the producing source. And so just like in a separation of church from state, I think there should be a separation of money from state, and that it would help us define a language without as much error and baggage baked into it, and we can be precise about the characteristics of a language that money speaks. A lot of money changed over the past.
Well, that's the big question, this separation of economy from the state, or money from the state. If you go back a couple slides, just to say, you and I gave a talk, and this equation is the equation that I talked about. It's basically energy minus entropy equals free energy. So the idea being that energy and entropy can be thought of in terms of knowledge gained and a knowledge lens, like these two minds, where knowledge gained would be like the first mind, the answering mind. Knowledge lens would be the second mind. And the point being that entropy is the cost of having a knowledge lens. So in a certain sense, like if you want to have a knowledge lens to improve or change or whatever the way that works, there's going to be a cost to that. It's going to and that cost is the entropy, and what's left over is the free energy. So there's more to talk about. I want to check in with Jere quickly, and then just to say we have so much to talk about. Maybe we'll make videos. Maybe we'll find different ways of sharing this. This has been very intense today. I've tried to emphasize the language of wisdom, just because that's what I really care about. But we're all headed. We're all contributing to shared reality. Jere, what would you?
I love it. I have all kinds of stuff to say on this in terms of what we actually do. And I've been working on this ecological intelligence as to how to get something grounded to do something, and also messed with a symbolic formalism to deal with these notions of language and money. There's only one source of money, and that's the oxidation of an atom of carbon to carbon dioxide. And everything else should be related to that. So there's one universal money, and to put all these other things, it just adds to confusion, and it's all to generate the wealthy.
Okay, so that's a hypothesis that we can pursue. We can try to see, that's very constructive. What would be the question that you're working on? How would you phrase your question, Jere?
What do we need to do in the real world?
Okay. And could you give some context for that?
Like, what do we apply it?
What do you think? What's the main issue in the world that you'd like to address?
War, extreme wealth inequality, autocracy, climate change, environmental pollution. Take your pick.
Fine. And what would you say is the principal cause of these things?
Extreme wealth inequality, I think, is the driving cause of all of that.
Okay, so that's very focused. So we can keep that. Steph, yeah?
I think if Andrius, I'd like to, if we could at some point, talk about the what Jere just said, the oxidation of a carbon atom, I think he said, but in terms of free energy, entropy, and
that's it.
Yeah,
free
energy and entropy.
But one other point I want to make here is nature doesn't do the math. So all the stuff we're talking about with mathematics, you don't see it in nature. There's no 2 + 2 in nature. There's no complex number and that sort of stuff. There's emotion, there's that kind of stuff. But
Montijn,
nothing out there is running the math.
What do you want to say, Montijn?
Yeah, just short it to Jere, because I do share your concerns, of course, for these kind of political actions. I'm just really, I would like to interact more with you about to what extent you agree, with my proposal, a political change about,
No, I love what you're
making.
doing. I love what you're doing. I had comments about, again, using this active inference and the problem with probabilities in terms of how we define those.
Why don't I propose I meet with Montijn next week, but what if Jere joined us and then we try to come up with a practical program, and then we'll have Jere speak next time, and then continue with Steph to see how he would expand on that, and then come back to Andrej. We'll keep mixing it up, something like that. Is that we'll think about this?
Yes.
And Jere, would you give us a closing prayer, please?
I love it. We all should continue, keep our cool. Let's go with it. This is great stuff.
Very good. Econet.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
You.